Hi, Julia Usher, Recipes for a Sweet Life. Merry Christmas. As you know by now, I love to craft inedible items as much as I do cookies and other edible goodies. And that being said, I have one such project for you today. We'll be making this lovely, what I'm calling costume jewelry mini Christmas wreath. I love those big, lavish, tinsel covered, ornament covered wreaths that you see on the internet and in magazines and such, but they require a lot of ornaments and it's really busy this time of year. So I've downscaled this project to a 6-inch size that makes a perfect place card if you hang it over the back of the chair. It makes a perfect welcome gift. You can hang it on a doorknob with a personalized message saying hello, welcome, greetings. Or it can make a lovely hostess gift if placed in a small keepsake box. So lots of versatility with it in terms of how it can be given, and because I've downscaled it, it's not going to take nearly as much time. I tend to have more costume jewelry than I have ornaments, so I'm going to be relying on that heavily in this project for the bling. But if you've got more of one or the other, by all means, feel free to use what you have. This project, again, is really accommodating, and we're going to be mixing, matching lots of stuff, so it's not important that everything be exactly the same. So let's talk about what you'll need to accomplish this project. So to start, you're going to need a wreath form of some style or another. Some of these styles might be more suitable for a certain style of project, whereas others might be more suitable for others. And I'll try to point out when I might use one versus another depending on the project. The one thing they do have in common, I should say, is they're all 6 inches in diameter. I want to keep this a mini wreath for purposes of keeping things time efficient. This is a chubby styrofoam form. There are also really slender ones. I prefer to use something chubby to give a lot of fluffiness to the wreath. They're equally easy to decorate on, even though this one is flat. I'm also going to be working with tinsel on my wreath, and I don't want a dark color showing out from underneath it, so I find that working on something paler tends to disappear more when being wrapped. Now, if you're going to be doing something more organic, you might tend towards one of these other 3 options. I've got a masonite frame, which is more brown, and so if a little brown shows through, it might be fitting with your organic brown and green palette. That might be fine. You could choose a grapevine wreath, which might be nice for a really rustic, whimsical wreath, which we're not going to be doing. I'm working with costume jewelry. Alternatively, this is kind of a cool option. This is nothing more than wired evergreen garland, and it just looks great as a wreath form in and of itself, completely wired without doing anything more to it. And in fact, that's what I used for this green wreath at the bottom, and which you'll see floating overhead. It doesn't need to be covered, so it saves a step. Now, to cover a styrofoam form or the masonite form, you're going to need something. I'm going glitz and glam, so I'm likely going to use gold tinsel. The one thing you want to be aware of is choose a strand or a garland that isn't too wide, because this is a small form. The garland really shouldn't be much more than 1.5 to 2 inches. Otherwise, you'll be filling the middle of the wreath, and that's not going to look so good. So I've got a vintage style tinsel here that's about 1.5 inches wide. And it comes in a variety of colors. Color palette is something we're going to be talking about in my next design section. A couple of other options that are really fun. They can be found in the fabric store. This really fuzzy garland that's evocative of snow or a furry trim on a winter coat has a really good wintry feel about it. Something frilly, almost evocative of snowflakes, also found in the fabric store, could be good. And there are a whole host of paper trims used for decorating birthday parties and other sorts of parties, usually strung as garlands, which also make a great wrap around the form. So lots of options here. Once it's wrapped, we're going to be putting stuff on top. And for that, as I said, I'm going to be relying on my vintage costume jewelry collection and filling in to a lesser degree with some smaller holiday ornaments just to give it a real Christmas vibe. So I've got an assortment of red and gold here, which I'll likely be using, but again, I'll be talking about color palette and how to make choices and how to assemble the range of things to put on the wreath in the next design section. I did speak about personalizing these wreaths. I think everybody loves a personalized gift at the holiday season. So I've got a lot of little frames of different sizes, also craft store items easily found in local craft stores or online that you can back with little personalized messages This one just says Hallelujah for Christmas, but you could put someone's name on it if it's going to be a place card. You could put welcome on it if it's going to be tied to the front of a bedroom door to welcome guests as they arrive at your home. Lots of possibilities here. Then I think no wreath is complete without a bow on it, so you want to assemble ribbons of assorted sizes, some wide, maybe not quite this wide. 1 to 2 inches is typically good for a wreath of this size. Some smaller ribbons, quite possibly for hanging the wreath. You could also use Christmas garlands, beaded garlands for hang ties, which I've done on this silver wreath. So lots of possibilities there. If you don't want to hang it and have a visible ribbon, you can also wire it from the back with floral wire. And our key tools for putting this together are really sharp scissors for cutting those ribbons, and the primary tool, a glue gun and a glue stick. Again, a simple craft store item. But again, you needn't have this wealth and abundance of items. Gather what you have. I'm sure with what you have among things you put aside to repurpose or re-gift, you'll have something really fun to assemble into a Christmas wreath. What I want to talk about next is the design process, how I go from this wealth of items and possibilities in front of me to a cohesive design. Okay, what to do with the plethora of stuff you've collected? How do you go from all that stuff to a cohesive design? I like to think of 2 key design variables. One is palette, and the other is the style you're trying to achieve, be it rustic, elegant, glamorous, etc. I'm going to do glam and bling, as I said, but I just want to show you a rustic option as well, just to give you a visual of what I'm talking about. So if you're going to go the rustic route, you might choose the grapevine wreath or the evergreen wreath, would look really cute. And then I keep the palette also very organic and natural, maybe sticking to a lot of greens as in these bottle brush trees with a touch of whimsical red in our felt Santas and our Santa ornaments. So that would create one wreath of a very certain feel. We're going to, of course, jazz it up with sparkle and costume jewelry for our wreaths. And that brings me to the point of color palette. I've got lots of different sparkly costume jewelry options here in front of me. My first step typically is to sort by a common color palette. I love to give these wreaths lots of texture and variation and shape, but if I also give a lot of variety in color on the wreath, it can look really, really busy. So I find that by grouping things by like color, I still get that textural interest because I've got a lot of different shapes amongst the things I've collected, but I don't have a real cacophony of things going on because there's a unifying color scheme. So just as an example, in my red box, which I'm likely to draw on, largely red and gold, however, I've got a variety of shapes. I've got some round ornaments, also some very angular star-shaped items, which are actually candle drip devices that catch wax. And I've, of course, got all that bling I talked about in a variety of shapes and sizes, different shades of gold, really some really tiny earrings as well. So you want to make sure once you sort things into color that you've got a nice assortment of shapes and sizes within each of your palettes in order to give your final wreath a lot of interest and variety. One last design point before we dive into the decorating. I do like to do a trial mock-up, fully wrap the wreath and lay my various elements on top before I commit to any particular design. Then I take a photograph of it. Here you'll see the photo of the wreath I'm trying to recreate. This just gives me a good visual before anything's stuck down because it's really hard to take anything off once it's hot glued down to tinsel. The whole thing will fall apart. But it also gives you a second check on does everything look proportional and well balanced. And in this photo view, I didn't like how big the bow looked. I love the particular ribbon. It's gorgeous and very lush and beautiful, but it just seemed too big. So as a consequence of doing that, I've tied some smaller bows in slightly different shades, which I'm hoping might work a little bit better and afford a little bit better balance on this piece. Okay, let's get wrapping. I've got mine partially started. I'm using my chubby styrofoam form because, as I said, I want a really full wreath. And the white, if it shows through a little bit, it's not going to detract from the overall design as much as a darker form might detract. I've got it partially wrapped. I do like to start gluing down on the back. You don't have to glue all together too frequently because the styrofoam is a little sticky naturally. So it's not going to shift around. I haven't glued any of this stuff. I've just coiled it through. You want to make sure your tinsel is well bundled here so you're not dragging the full length through each time because that just takes a lot longer. Might seem obvious, but I didn't do that the first time I made these wreaths. So I'm going to spiral it through 3 or 4 times and then tack on the back side again, making sure it looks fluffy and it's well wrapped all the way around without too many gaps. You need about 12 to 13 feet of tinsel, believe it or not, to fully wrap this 6-inch styrofoam, which is about 1.5 inches tall. So I'm just going to continue in this vein. The beauty of not tacking too much down too soon is that if you find it's not evenly spaced, you can still make adjustments at the end or throughout the process. If you tack it everywhere, then find you have a big gap. That's going to be harder to do. Okay, the first step is simply to pick out all the decorations that were once on here and which went into making my design picture. I'm just going to try to reconstruct what I had photographed. And that will help me make a decision about the bow, which was an issue. I'm not sure how this one will work, but let's put it here for now. Okay, I think I've finally settled on a bow I like. Some of these were just too red for me and not as rich looking. And of course, as I mentioned before, this one just seemed way too big. So I think this one's going to work well. There are some gaps around it, but that's okay. I like to start first by placing my big items. Then I can look at it more holistically and say where are there small gaps, and I'll fill them in with some of the smaller red and, in this case, gold little baubles that I've got here. So let me start by anchoring. I also need to stick the message down behind this plaque, so let me do that first. I'm just going to put a touch of glue on the back because I don't want it squeezing out the front. And then center it quickly over the message. The thing about glue guns is they create glue strands, so we want to clean those all off. That looks pretty good. It's a little low, but that's okay. And now we're ready to glue everything down. The nice thing too is if you want to recover any of this jewelry, I know it might seem excessive to be putting so much jewelry on a decorative piece like this, is the glue will pop off and you can easily peel it off, the actual metal structure of the jewelry, and recover the jewelry for its original purpose, if that's important to you. I'm largely focused on decorating the top of the wreath. We're not going to see the back, obviously, and I'm not too concerned about people seeing the sides of it, but if you want to decorate around the sides too, that's fine too. Typically I would do that though with smaller elements so that the wreath doesn't get too bulky looking from the front on view. All of these have their clasps on them. Again, if you're not concerned with saving the jewelry, it's easier to glue these down without the clasps. But if you do want to save it, you can most definitely keep them on. I do like to overlap elements as well, so it looks a little more festive and fall. Just want to make sure I leave enough room for this bow here. So I might move these guys up a little bit. This is going to be the bottom of my wreath, so the bow will be towards the bottom, with the heavier elements also weighted towards the bottom, so I'm getting kind of leaner and lighter as things go towards the top on purpose because I want it to be bottom weighted. I think that just looks better from a design standpoint. So now that I've got my big stuff down, I want to fill in with some small stuff, particularly this area in the middle of this pin that I substituted because I can see some of the hot glue there. So I'll probably dump an ornament in the middle there. Maybe not red, perhaps gold, we'll see. And there's a lot of gap down by this bow. And I originally had some bells in the drawing, so I think I'm going to try to stick a few of these guys down here. like so. So let's get those guys down there first because they're looking pretty good. Okay, once the bell's on, you want to just make sure that it doesn't interfere with the hanging of the bow. So let me adjust that a little bit so the bow is free falling. I think that looks pretty good. Now on to more small elements. I think I'm going to put another red one down here to balance the other one that I'm going to put in the center of the costume jewelry. I like to bottom weight the wreath as well, so the bigger small elements will go towards the bottom and I'll have smaller gold ones, even smaller still, on top. Let's get that guy down. And then lastly, let's move on to the gold beads. These came off a threaded garland, so you just want to make sure you anchor them so that the hole is not facing up. And I'm going to tuck a few more into the wreath just to give it a little more glitter and glitz. So I've got it all decorated to my liking, laying flat on the surface. You do, throughout the process, want to periodically lift it up and make sure none of those baubles are falling forward. They might need a little more tacking behind them, for instance. Mine seem pretty good, but what I'm noticing is it's a little spare, of course, on top. I don't want it too loaded up there, but I might just put another ornament or two in here, so because I just seem to have a big gold spot. And I don't know if I have any small red ones. That would be ideal. If not, I think putting that size there will look too lumpy. So I think I am going to resort to another small gold one or two kind of up here at the top, just so there's a little glitter when I do lift it up. And then we'll talk about methods for securing the wreaths to something else. Okay, yeah, so it just is filled out a little bit there, and I like that a touch better. So that's the finished product. Very glitz and glam, using my costume jewelry dominantly, with just a few little Christmas ornaments there. Okay, now options for hanging it up. Those that are hung there are actually hooked onto these little clips. So if you have that kind of structure, a hook you want to hook onto, a great device for that is just a cup hook that you can plunge into the back of the styrofoam and then hot glue in. You can put it that way and then hook into it underneath. Or if you just want to put it that way and then hang something from that, that's a possibility too. You could alternatively take a coordinating piece of ribbon, something like this for instance, and just either wrap it around the top, which is partially why I left a space there, but I don't really want that ribbon showing in the front. So I could alternatively just hot glue it all the way up the back with the design facing forward. Or alternatively, you can take these fun 3M devices, self-adhesive hang tags that are removable as well. You take two of them, you click them together until you hear them click. Remove the sticky side from one side, stick it to your wreath, and then remove the other sticky side and stick it to whatever you're going to apply it to. I'm not going to commit to the hang tie just yet though, because it may very well depend on who's getting this wreath and the location in which it's going, but at least I've shown you 3 or 4 possibilities for tying up your wreaths. And that concludes my vintage costume jewelry wreath project. It's extremely versatile. As you saw, it can be done in any color palette or style, from whimsical to glam. It's also very, very easy, just a simple gluing process. I hope you'll try it this holiday season, as I'm sure you and your guests will love one. Merry Christmas and live sweetly.